Ladies and gentlemen, there is a subtle, often uncomfortable truth about life that few are willing to speak and fewer are willing to accept. What do you do with your pain? You turn toward it. You observe it. You do not suppress it nor dramatize it. You simply become aware. This is the beginning of liberation. Pain in its raw form is simply a signal, a sensation, a message from the body or the psyche that something is occurring. It arises, stays for a while, and then, like all things in nature, it passes. However, human beings rarely experience pain in this pure form. What we often refer to as pain is not the immediate sensation, but the mind's narrative built around it. This narrative, which includes our thoughts, identifications, memories, and projections, transforms pain into suffering. Let us observe closely. A physical injury, such as a cut or a burn, creates discomfort. That discomfort is real, but it is usually momentary, manageable, and treated. However, if the injury happens in a context charged with emotion, say, during an argument or in a situation where we feel humiliated, the mind does not simply register the sensation. It interprets, remembers, and stores it. It may replay the event, assign blame, or weave a story around it. I was mistreated. They don't respect me. Why does this always happen to me? These thoughts, over time, carry far more weight than the original experience. In this way, pain becomes psychological. It is no longer just what happened. It becomes what we think about what happened. The moment the mind identifies with the experience and gives it a name, a label, or a personal story, pain solidifies into suffering. This identification with pain is deeply ingrained in the human condition. It begins early in life when we learn to associate experiences with labels. A good and a bad, safe and a threatening, a rewarding and a punishing. Over time, the mind becomes conditioned to cling to pleasure and resist pain, and wherever there is resistance, suffering takes root. We may experience loss, and instead of feeling the natural grief of impermanence, which has its own quiet beauty, we resist. We say, this should not have happened. We mentally replay scenarios, analyze, question, and the pain is no longer just a response to the loss. It is now multiplied by the mind's refusal to accept what is. So much of our suffering stems from this resistance. The belief that we are in control of life's outcomes, and when events unfold contrary to our desires, we internalize that discord as pain, and yet pain itself is often neutral. It is the mind that makes it personal. This is why two people can undergo the same external experience, say, the end of a relationship or the loss of a job, and yet respond in vastly different ways. One may enter into deep, prolonged suffering, feeling broken and defeated. The other may feel momentary sadness, but quickly returns to balance. What differentiates them is not the event itself, but the interpretation, the mental construct layered on top of the raw experience. You may ask, why does the mind do this? Why does it turn pain into suffering? The answer lies in the ego. The ego, that sense of a separate self that seeks to define itself through form, identity, status, and story, thrives on drama. It feeds on problems, both real and imagined. Pain becomes a tool for the ego to strengthen its narrative. I am the one who was wronged. I am the one who suffers the most. I have endured so much. These stories are addictive because they give us a sense of identity, even if that identity is rooted in victimhood. The mind says, I am my pain, and in that belief we suffer. But there is another way to approach pain, one that leads not to suppression, but to transformation. That way is awareness. When you become aware of pain without immediately labeling or resisting it, something shifts. You begin to see the pain not as a mean, but as an arising experience, like a wave that appears on the surface of the ocean. You are not the wave, you are the ocean. This awareness creates space. In that space, pain loses its grip. It may still arise, but it is no longer amplified by the mind. You see it for what it is, temporary, changing, without solidity. Consider a moment when you felt emotional pain, perhaps rejection, loneliness, or despair. Instead of replaying the story behind it, try to focus purely on the sensation of it in the body. Where does it live? The chest, the throat, the belly? Is it tightness, heaviness, burning? By staying with the raw sensation, without naming or judging it, you are disentangling the pain from the mental construct. You are dissolving the story. This practice, the practice of presence, is not about avoiding pain. It is about meeting pain directly, without the interference of the mind's drama. And when you do this, you may find something extraordinary. The pain begins to dissipate on its own. It needs your identification to survive. Without it, it cannot sustain itself. This does not mean you become cold or indifferent. On the contrary, presence allows for a deeper kind of compassion. Not the kind that says, "Abhor me," but the kind that quietly accepts, "This is what is here now." And in that acceptance, healing becomes possible. So much of our psychological distress is prolonged through time. The mind pulls pain from the past and projects it into the future. It says, "This happened to me, and then, what if it happens again?" In this way, pain becomes permanent, a feature of identity rather than a passing experience. But life does not exist in the past or the future. It exists only now. And in the now, pain is manageable. In the now, there is no story, only sensation. In the now, you are not your pain. You are the awareness that notices it. To recognize this is to reclaim your power. You stop being at the mercy of the mind stories. You begin to live from a deeper intelligence, one that trusts the unfolding of life and does not resist it. And when pain arises, you greet it like a wave. You watch it rise, you feel its presence, and you allow it to recede. This does not mean pain will never visit you again. It will. That is part of being human. But you will no longer be trapped by it. You will no longer carry it long after it has left. You will no longer confuse it with who you are, and this, ultimately, is freedom. It is the freedom of being present. The freedom of knowing that pain is not your enemy, but your teacher. It shows you where you are holding on, where you are resisting, where you are still unconscious. When you bring awareness to it, the teaching completes itself, and pain is no longer needed. So we return to the simple truth. Pain is a mental construct, not because it is imaginary, but because its intensity is shaped by how we think about it. Free the mind from its stories, and pain loses its weight. What remains is awareness, vast, still, and untroubled. You rest there, and in doing so you become whole again. From a very young age, human beings are conditioned to seek approval. A smile from a parent, a gold star in the classroom, a pat on the back from a coach. These small signals become powerful reinforcements. They teach us that we are seen, that we matter, that we are doing something right. And thus begins the unconscious training, to look outside of ourselves for confirmation of our worth. This search for external validation may appear harmless at first, even motivating, but over time it becomes a prison, one that disconnects us from our inner reality. One that makes us forget who we are before the world told us who to be. The illusion of external validation is not just about wanting praise or attention. At its root, it is the ego's strategy for survival. The ego, that mental construct we often mistake for our true self, cannot exist without feedback. It thrives on being seen, acknowledged, admired, and when it is ignored, rejected, or criticized, it feels diminished, as if it were disappearing. So when pain enters our lives, emotional pain, heartbreak, loneliness, betrayal, the ego does not simply feel the pain. It demands that the pain be noticed. It wants witnesses. It wants sympathy. It wants others to say, "Yes, you are right to hurt. Yes, what happened to you was unfair. Yes, you deserve to be healed." But the world is rarely so attentive. Most people are caught in the web of their own internal narratives, their own pains, their own pains, their own insecurities. When we expect others to hold space for our wounds, we forget that they are often overwhelmed by the weight of their own. The illusion is not that people are unkind. It is that we expect them to be fully conscious when they are not. This expectation is the root of much suffering. We believe that if our pain is acknowledged by others, it becomes lighter. If someone understands us, then we feel validated. But this momentary relief quickly fades. The ego becomes addicted to it, and like all addictions, it demands more. more validation, more understanding, more emotional support. But what happens when it is not given? The ego collapses into resentment. It says, no one cares about me. It says, I am invisible. It says, this world is cruel. And now, pain has been layered with bitterness, loneliness, and the belief in abandonment. The suffering grows deeper, not because the original pain was unbearable, but because the external world did not respond the way the ego demanded. This is the trap. External validation is fleeting. Even when received, it is never enough. It must be renewed constantly. It makes you dependent on others for your inner state of peace. And yet, others are unpredictable. They are distracted. They are fearful. They are often unconscious. To rely on them for stability is like building a home on shifting sand. But the deeper truth is more liberating than it may seem at first. You do not need anyone to validate your pain for it to be real. You do not need anyone to understand you for your experience to be meaningful. The search for validation is born of the belief that your pain only matters if it is seen by others. But pain does not become more or less real based on how many people acknowledge it. It is real because you experience it. That is enough. And yet, ego does not want to accept this. Because if you stop needing validation, you stop needing ego. You stop needing to be seen as the one who suffers most. You stop telling stories that paint you as the victim. You stop performing your pain in the hope that someone will rescue you. To move beyond the need for external validation is not to become numb or unfeeling. It is to become anchored, rooted, centered in your own presence. It is to understand that others may or may not be able to hold space for you, but that you can always hold space for yourself. This is not a withdrawal from connection. It is a maturation within connection. When you no longer seek others to constantly affirm your emotional experiences, you enter relationships with greater freedom. You do not demand. You do not manipulate. You do not burden. You simply meet others as they are, not as you wish them to be. And when validation does come, when someone does listen or understand or offer compassion, you are grateful but not dependent. You do not cling. You do not fear its loss. You see it for what it is, a gift, not a necessity. This shift from external to internal awareness is subtle but radical. It transforms how you carry pain. Instead of broadcasting it, you befriend it. Instead of needing someone to agree with your story, you begin to question the story itself. And when the story dissolves, what remains is something more still, more sacred, a quiet strength born not of validation but of presence. In that presence, you are no longer the one who is hurting. You are the one who witnesses the hurt. And in that witnessing, the pain loses its hold. Not because it disappears, but because you are no longer identified with it. You are no longer saying, I am in pain. You are saying, there is pain. And that subtle shift changes everything. It changes how you relate to others as well. You stop expecting them to fix you. You stop expecting them to say the right thing. You stop resenting them for being human and imperfect. Instead, you see them with compassion, because you know they, too, are seeking the same things you once sought, to be seen, to be heard, to be held. But now, you are no longer chasing that from the outside. You have become the space in which all emotions are allowed to rise and fall, without judgment, without performance, without the need to be acknowledged. And yet something beautiful happens here. The less you need external validation, the more people are drawn to your presence. Not because you are dramatic or wounded or seeking, but because you are silent, grounded, whole. They feel something in you that is rare, the absence of demand, the presence of peace. It is a paradox. The moment you no longer need attention, you become magnetic. The moment you no longer seek sympathy, you become deeply compassionate. The moment you stop shouting your pain, your presence begins to speak louder than words. This is not about hiding your pain as a form of denial. It is about no longer needing the world to validate it. It is about taking full responsibility for your inner state, not by force or suppression, but by awareness. When you no longer expect others to care in a particular way, you begin to appreciate them for who they are, not for what they can do for you. You allow relationships to be rooted in love rather than need. You become available for deeper connection because you are no longer using others as a mirror to reflect your worth. You see, validation was never meant to be the source of your identity. It was meant to be a reflection, a brief reminder, not a foundation. The foundation must be your own awareness, your own acceptance, your own understanding of self, and in that understanding, a powerful clarity arises. The world does not owe you validation, and you do not owe the world a performance of your pain. You are allowed to feel. You are allowed to feel. You are allowed to cry, to grieve, to tremble. But you are also allowed to do so quietly, inwardly, with dignity. Not because you're afraid of being seen, but because you no longer need to be. When this realization takes root, you begin to live with greater serenity. You move through life with a calm that no praise can inflate and no rejection can deflate. You become your own sanctuary, and from this sanctuary, you are able to offer genuine compassion to others, not from a place of lack, but from a place of fullness. So the illusion of external validation begins to dissolve. You see it for what it is, a temporary fix for a deeper forgetting, a forgetting of your own completeness. And now, you begin to remember. You remember that your pain is valid, not because someone else agrees with it, but because it is part of your human experience. You remember that healing is not granted by others, but arises from presence. You remember that the one who truly sees you is always here, within. And in that remembrance, you no longer seek validation. You become it. Would you like the third keynote expanded next as well? Freedom, the kind that is not granted by circumstance but discovered within, does not come from being understood, acknowledged, or consoled by others. It arises when you no longer seek these things as conditions for peace. Many people spend their lives unconsciously searching for freedom through external sympathy, through the comforting words of others, the attentive ear, the warm reassurance that says, "I see your pain, I feel it with you." And while this may soothe for a moment, it does not liberate. It is fleeting. It is dependent. The freedom you truly seek cannot be given to you by another. It is not something someone else can offer, no matter how kind or empathetic they may be. It emerges only when you shift your attention inward and become present, when you stop trying to escape your pain through others and begin meeting it yourself from a place of quiet awareness. When pain arises, the instinctive impulse is to react, to talk about it, to explain it, to have it validated, to be told that it is justified. But in doing so, the ego takes ownership of the pain. It becomes a me pain, a me suffering, a me wound. This ownership strengthens identity around it, as if the self is somehow more real when accompanied by struggle. It is not uncommon to hear someone say, "If they only understood what I've been through, then I'd feel better." But notice that even if such understanding is offered, it does not last. The mind moves quickly to the next unmet emotional need, the next desire to be seen, the next wound to present for comfort. The deeper truth is this: the more we rely on external sympathy, the more we drift from our own inner presence. Sympathy becomes a substitute for awareness. But no one else can be present with your pain in the way that you can. Others may comfort you, and their care may be sincere, but their presence is not a replacement for your own. If anything, their presence can only serve to point you back to yourself. The human ego thrives on being the center of the emotional stage. It wants to be the one hurting, the one misunderstood, the one healing, because all of these reinforce its sense of self. But presence does not need a story. Presence does not need a stage. It is simply here, silent, observing, open wide. It allows all things to arise and pass without claiming them. When you enter presence, you do not say, "I'm in pain." You become aware that pain is here, moving through the space of your being, but you are not confined by it. There is a great power in realizing this. Because once you are no longer trapped in the identity of the one who suffers, you begin to move differently through the world. You do not close yourself off. You do not wear a mask. But you no longer present your pain as a currency, something you offer in exchange for attention, pity, or closeness. And You no longer need to be pitied to feel worthy of love. You no longer need to share your story to feel seen. You are rooted in something deeper, something unshakable. What often binds us to our pain is not the pain itself, but the belief that we need someone else to carry it with us. The expectation that others will mirror our suffering with perfect understanding. And when they do not, when they fall short or misunderstand or respond with silence, we feel abandoned. But what if that very moment of being unmet is not a rejection, but an opportunity, an invitation to stop reaching outward and turn inward instead? This turning inward is not a withdrawal from life or people. It is not isolation. It is connection, not to others, but to your own true nature. Presence is the part of you that is untouched by story. It is still, awake, and spacious. It does not cling to roles. It does not ask who will hold me. It simply holds what is here. In presence, you realize that you are not the pain. You are the space in which the pain appears. And in that realization, a great softening begins. You no longer need to be consoled. You no longer need to be understood in order to feel whole. The pain may still move through you, but it no longer defines you. There is great dignity in carrying pain quietly, not out of suppression, but out of strength. When you are rooted in presence, you may still cry, still grieve, still ache. But you do not collapse. You do not hand your inner world over to someone else, hoping they will fix it. You take responsibility, not in a burdensome way, but in an empowered way. You begin to see pain not as an enemy, but as a teacher. And what it teaches, more than anything, is presence. You may notice how often people speak about their suffering as if it were their identity. They list the ways they were hurt. They rehearse the stories. They point to the villains. But underneath it all is a simple desire to be free. The paradox is that freedom does not come from telling the story more loudly. It comes from becoming still enough to notice the story and to let it dissolve. Freedom is not found in more explanation. It is found in less attachment. And here lies the contrast between presence and sympathy. Sympathy, though well-meaning, often invites you to stay in the narrative, to repeat it, to justify it, to become it. Presence invites you to witness the narrative without becoming entangled in it. It does not deny the experience, but it does not turn it into identity either. It sees through the form to the formless, the unchanging awareness behind every changing emotion. You may find that as you grow in presence, your need for sympathy diminishes. Not because you become cold or distant, but because you are no longer seeking outside yourself for what already lives within. The attention and comfort of others may still be welcome, but they are no longer essential. You do not lean on them to stay standing. This self-reliance is not hard-hearted. It is the essence of true compassion. For when you are no longer burdened by your own unmet needs, you become more available to meet others where they are, without expectation, without judgment, without fear. The journey to inner presence is not about perfection. It is not about eliminating emotion. It is about becoming intimate with your experience without needing to advertise it, without needing the world to fix it, without needing your pain to be seen as valid by anyone else, because it already is. Pain, like all things, is impermanent. It moves, shifts, fades, but your awareness of it, your presence, remains constant. This is your true home. And when you live from this place, you are no longer thrown about by the changing tides of emotion or the fluctuating reactions of others. You are not unfeeling. You are deeply feeling, but not consumed. You do not hide your pain to pretend you are fine. You allow it to be there without needing anyone to see it. You do not suppress it. You simply no longer present it as your identity. This is freedom. And in that freedom, a subtle joy begins to emerge. Not the joy of excitement, but the joy of being. The joy that arises when you are no longer seeking, no longer grasping, no longer needing the world to give you something you now give to yourself. Presence. You begin to walk through life with quiet strength. You listen more. You react less. You carry your experiences with grace, not because they are small, but because you are vast. This is not the freedom of escape. It is the freedom of inclusion. You are free because everything is allowed to be as it is. Within you, You are no longer resisting. You are no longer bargaining with reality. You are no longer waiting for someone else to show up and say, "You are okay. You are here now," saying it to yourself. And even when you are not okay, even when pain visits again, you do not panic. You do not search the room for sympathy. You return to the stillness. You breathe, you watch, you wait, and in time the wave passes, as it always does. You are not healed by others. You are healed by your own willingness to stay with what is. And so, you no longer fear the lack of sympathy. You are no longer bound to the reactions of others. You do not need their approval or agreement or even their understanding, because you understand, and that is enough. Would you like me to format all 3 Keynote expansions as a single downloadable document for easier reference or sharing? And so, ladies and gentlemen, we arrive not at an end, but at a still point. A moment of clarity within. We have explored the hidden layers beneath the surface of pain, the compulsion to be seen, the thirst for external validation, and the deep misunderstanding that freedom is found through the sympathy of others. In truth, they pull us away from the quiet place within ourselves where genuine healing begins. The world, in its busyness and distraction, may not always stop to witness your suffering. It may not pause to reflect back to you the depth of your hurt. And that is not cruelty. It is simply the nature of unconsciousness. The expectation that others must carry our pain often leads us deeper into isolation. But within that disappointment lies an invitation, not to harden, but to awaken. When you no longer need your pain to be validated, you begin to carry it differently. Not as a burden to be offloaded, but as a silent teacher. You realize that your value, your presence, your wholeness, none of these are diminished by the absence of external acknowledgement. They are not given to you by others, and therefore cannot be taken away. True strength is not in hiding your pain out of fear, but in no longer needing to display it for recognition. True freedom is not found in being understood, but in understanding yourself. It is in being so deeply rooted in presence that the fluctuations of others' attention, approval, or misunderstanding no longer disturb your inner clarity. So let your pain be quiet if it must be. Let it pass through you without resistance. Hold it, not for the world to see, but for yourself to meet with compassion. And when it fades, as all things do, you will find that something remains, not bitterness, not shame, but peace, a peace that no one else gave you, a peace that was always waiting within. Thank you.